The following telephone recordings are from July 1980, as is most of the narration. Additional narration was added in 2015. CCSA networks were something else. Really, they were something else. During the time that the regular Bell system network was getting more and more boring, CCSA networks were an alternative that could be learned about and explored, and they were different. In July 1980, at a telephone sales job, I called a number in downtown Atlanta expecting to speak to a potential customer, and instead I got a second dial tone. I made note of the number, and when I got home later, I began to investigate what that number was. It turned out that it was a way to call into the in-company network of a large conglomerate, the one that the Continental Can Company had grown into by that time. This company no longer exists as such, but at the time it was huge, and their in-company telephone network, not administered by the Bell system, but by some independent phone company like MCI or Southern Pacific Communications, was fascinating. There was no security code. You could simply call up the number, get the second dial tone, and dial anything you wanted on their network. Between July 1980 and sometime in the fall of 1981, I was able to do a lot of research, and I have about 5 hours of tape on this. Now, to appreciate this, you would have to have a lot of familiarity with the regular telephone network of the time. So this whole series is for people who have listened to others of my phone tapes. I would recommend having heard a lot of the long distance series, which will give you a feel for the regular Bell System long distance network, and also the early 80s series, programs number 2 and 4. After hearing those, this will make a lot more sense. The name of the network was ConTelNet, but most employees at the various divisions of the company seemed to be under the impression that it was called the Continent. It wasn't until I was a good way into the research that finally an employee pronounced it ConTelNet. Of course, by now, 2015, that name will have been completely abandoned and recycled by someone else for some other purpose, so whatever it means now has no bearing on what it meant in 1980 when these recordings were made.
Well, the time has come to record the CCSA, and it's really hard to know where to start. CCSA is such a complicated thing, and this one is not a Bell System CCSA. It's being supplied by some other company. Basically, the CCSA enables you to dial area codes and numbers for long-distance calls. And the equipment will use a tie line if it's got one, or a Watts line, or whatever the best way to call that number is. So you just dial from your PBX, you just dial 8, or whatever the access code is, and then when you get the dial tone from the CCSA, you dial the 10-digit number you need, and the equipment does the rest, picks whatever the best route is. The other thing you can dial on the CCSA is company network numbers. All the company's offices have tie line codes. For example, there could be a PBX in New York, a Dimension PBX that may or may not have DID from the rest of the world through the Bell system. That really doesn't matter. The point is that you can reach numbers in that Dimension PBX by dialing a 3-digit tie line code plus the extension number. With PBXs that have 3 or 2-digit extension numbers, sometimes it's a 3-digit tie line code plus 2 digits, or 1 digit, whatever the case may be, and then the extension number. So when you dial 8 and you get a CCSA dial tone, you're either dialing an area code and a number for a number outside the company, or you're dialing a 7-digit number as an inside company number. To reach that particular PBX in New York, if you wanted to reach extension 2368, you would dial 551-2368. So that's how it works from a user standpoint. Let me explain now how their network is set up. There are basically 3 CCSA tandems, and from any PBX in the southern part of the country, if you dial the code for CCSA, be it 8 or whatever, you will get a dial tone from the Atlanta tandem. Then into the Atlanta tandem, you will either dial the area coded number or the 7-digit company number. The other 2 tandems, there's one in Chicago, and there's one somewhere in Connecticut. And again, whichever PBX you're in, in other parts of the country, in New York, you dial 8 and you'll go to Connecticut. You'll go to the CCSA office there. Now, suppose you are dialing into the Atlanta CCSA Tandem. Your call is going to go through any of 5 ways. Your call will either go through a Watts line in Atlanta, or it will go through a tie line from the Atlanta Tandem to the city you want. It could either be an FX line to that city for long-distance calls, or if you're calling a PBX, it could be a direct tie line to that PBX. Or your call will go from the Atlanta Tandem to one of the other 2 tandems, either the Chicago Tandem or the Connecticut Tandem, and then either of those 2 tandems will again either put it out on a Watts line or on a tie line. There is a final possibility, which I forgot to mention, and that is that it appears that the tandems themselves can be a PBX. I have found a code that rings a number which maybe the Atlanta CCSA Tandem is also a PBX. Let me first explain what my access to this thing is. It's a 7-digit number that we dial up that gives you a dial tone from the Atlanta CCSA Tandem. And the dial tone only lets you dial company 7-digit numbers. Let me demonstrate what happens if you try to dial an area code and a number on that dial tone.
The number dialed is invalid. Please check the number and redial your call.
You will be hearing that recording again, hopefully better quality. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's not. That time it was very loud. Notice also that the announcement itself isn't coming from Atlanta, it's coming from somewhere else. You can hear the long-distance noise during the announcement. But on that access that I have, you can dial a company number. And let me now demonstrate calling a 7-digit number. This one is 743, which appears to be in the same machine as the Atlanta CCSA Tandem. I'll now dial some 743 number. So there's a call where I got a dial tone from the Atlanta machine and dialed a number that apparently is in that machine. Now the next kind of call, direct tie line from the Atlanta machine to another PBX. The code I'm going to use is 794. It goes to a PBX in South Carolina, which is a dimension. Here's what it sounds like to call a 794 extension. Next, I'll record a call that goes from the Atlanta Tandem to the Chicago Tandem, and then on a tie line from the Chicago Tandem to a PBX somewhere in that part of the country.
The number dialed is invalid. Please check the number and redial your call.
Okay, what we had here was some kind of misdialing in the equipment. Notice that this time we got the recording from the Chicago Tandem, and the reorder wasn't coming from the local Atlanta machine. In fact, the carrier noise is still on the line. So the Atlanta machine apparently put the call through properly as far as it was concerned, and somewhere a digit got lost. I'm going to try it again. The code is 480, and after I dial, you'll hear a pause, and you'll hear the carrier noise to Chicago come on, and then you'll hear the cut through to the PBX. By the way, the cut-through, after Atlanta sent the number to Chicago, was late. It sent the number and then waited a while to cut through on that call. And it's been doing that a lot tonight for some reason. So the amount of time you heard between the carrier noise coming on and the cut-through to the PBX, which gave the intercept tone, wasn't as long as it actually took to pulse the number. But that's because Atlanta has been being late to cut through today. By the way, in case you're wondering what type of signaling is used between the Atlanta and Chicago tandems, it's SF for supervision and touch tone for the number you're calling. Okay, here's a call that goes through the Connecticut tandem. And the signaling between the Atlanta tandem and the Connecticut tandem is some sort of CCIS. It's very fast and there's no supervision sound. So this call is going to go from the Atlanta tandem to the Connecticut tandem through CCIS, and then the Connecticut tandem will pick up a regular old tie line trunk to the PBX in New York and dial the last 4 digits. So I'm going to dial 5517999. That is slower than it used to be, and I'm hoping it's going to get back the way it was, because that slow cut-through on Atlanta is very confusing. Okay, now a call that goes out on a Watts line in Atlanta. This is where they don't use a distant tandem and they don't use a tie line or anything. The code is 246, and it appears that it doesn't matter what last 4 digits you dial, you still get the main switchboard number. This is apparently a very small office of the company, whose PBX, if they even have one, is not on the network. And so you dial 246 anything and you get the main number, which, who knows what it is. Usually they will tell you to dial the same last 4 digits as the last 4 digits that happen to be the main number, but it's not necessary. So here we have 246, I'll dial 2368, and it will go out on an Atlanta Watts line. Okay, as you may have guessed, this thing is useful for more than just calling company numbers, even though that's all you can dial. There are little quirks everywhere. For instance, that Chicago Tandem that you can whistle off, if you whistle it off, you can not only dial company numbers, but you can touch tone an area code and a number, and it will go through as the Chicago switch would put it through. Also, there are PBXs that allow you to reach their 9 lines and tie lines and watts lines from the outside. For instance, that PBX in South Carolina, 794, when you call it, the Atlanta switch dials the last 3 digits into the tie line and cuts you through. Now, if the first of the last 3 digits is a 9, you get the 9 line. So I'm now going to dial, oh, and by the way, again, there's something funny about dimensions that makes it so that if you reach a 9 line on a tie line, the next 2 digits don't get dialed out onto the line. And I don't know why that is, but I've seen it over and over. So anyway, I'm now going to reach the 9 line in South Carolina by dialing 794-1911.
Good morning, 128. What city?
What city is this, please? I'm testing, operator.
It's you, sir.
Yes, I'm testing. What city have I reached?
You've reached Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now I'm going to dial my number on that 9 line, but I'm not going to allow the call to complete. So 9 gives us the 9 line. Let's see what's on 5. Let's see what I shouldn't say what's on 5, let's see what 5 does. I'll call 794-1511.
The number dialed is invalid. Please check the number and redial your call.
Well, and that PBX5 is the CCSA. Let's see if it's the same machine as the one I'm getting when I'm dialing into it here. It's hard to prove that, but I'm now going to call 743. That was that code that rang right in the machine. I'm going to dial that by way of South Carolina. So first I'll dial my access, then I'll dial 794-1511. Then when I get the CCSA dial tone by way of South Carolina, I'll then dial 743. Well, looks like we're having problems getting through to that 794 tie line. Very common in this particular system. I've been having problems with that all night. And I'm going to try it a couple more times, and if it doesn't cooperate, I'll have to go on and demonstrate this from some other angle. So, it looks as if when we dial 5 into that South Carolina PBX, we get the same CCSA dial tone as when I dial that 7-digit number that I'm calling initially. And it is the same thing, except for one slight difference. When I dial on my local Atlanta number, I can only dial company numbers. But when you come into the CCSA from one of the PBXs, that's a very different story. Actually, I'm glad that number was busy because it went out on a Watts line. Apparently they don't have or don't use a tie line for that part of LA. So you can get the CCSA back through one of the PBXs and it lets you dial anything. Now, one way to get an indication of approximately where the CCSA tandem that you're dealing with is by dialing into it a vacant code in an area code that you know the company network doesn't have tie lines to and will therefore go out on a Watts line. So I'm going to get that CCSA dial tone and dial a vacant code in Montana, area code 406. It'll use a Watts line because it doesn't have any tie lines up there. It's not going to use one of the other two CCSA tandems. If it does, we'll hear it do it. And whatever happens, we will probably end up with an Atlanta 4E recording, since the Atlanta switch uses an Atlanta Watts line, and the Watts line goes through to the 4E, and the 4E says no such code.
Please check the number and dial again or ask your operator to help you. This is a recording, 4041C. Please check the number and and dial again or ask your operator to help you. This is a recording. 441C.
Okay, so we now know that if you dial 406-660 into the Atlanta Tandem, the call ends up going out on a line, probably a Watts line, which has outgoing toll by way of the Atlanta 4E. Now I'm going to dial 480-1811, and the call will go through as follows. Dialing 480-1811 into the Atlanta machine, that will pick up a trunk to Chicago and touchtone 7 digits. Then Chicago will pick up a trunk to the PBX, which is a dimension, by the way, and it will dial the last 3 digits, 811. Dimension will ignore the 11, and we will be left with the dial tone that they hear when they dial 8, which is from the Chicago CCSA.
The number dialed is invalid. Please check the number and redial your call.
Now, what would happen if you dialed a 406 vacant code into the Chicago Tandem, that dial tone? Well, you wouldn't get an Atlanta Watts line, you'd probably get a Chicago Watts line.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 312-18C. We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 312-18C.
Alrighty. Now, I do not know a dimension through which I can reach a dial tone from the Connecticut machine. I do know of an ESS Centrex through which I can reach it. But being an ESS Centrex, I have to use it a little differently. Now, this particular Centrex appears to be in Baltimore. It's certainly somewhere in Maryland. And I'm going to dial 727-9844. What this will do is that when I dial 727-9844, the Atlanta machine will go CCIS to the Connecticut machine. Connecticut machine picks up a trunk to the Centrex in Baltimore and then dials 9844. Now, what we end up with by dialing 9844 is 844 having been dialed into the 9 line. The 9 gets a 9 dial tone, and then the thing keeps on dialing. It dials 844. So when I'm cut through, I will be sitting on an ESS register into which I will have to touchtone the last 4 digits myself. So what we will be doing is calling 844-2525 in Baltimore. By dialing 727-9844, waiting for everything to be dialed, and then dialing the last 4 digits myself.
At the tone, the time will be 3:30 and 20 seconds. At the tone, the time will be 3:30 and 30 seconds. At the tone, the time will be 3:30 and 40 seconds. At the tone, the time will be 3:30 and 50 seconds. At the tone, the time will be 3:31 exactly. At the tone, the time will be 3:31 and 10 seconds. At the tone, the time will be 3:31 and 20 seconds. At the tone, the time...
Alrighty, now let me dial a Montana vacant code into that Maryland 9 line. So I'll be dialing 727-9140 and then continuing to dial 6-660-2368.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 3012. We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or call your operator to help you. This is a recording. 3012. We're sorry.
Alrighty, now we were just dialing a Montana vacant code into the Maryland 9 line. What about dialing a Montana vacant code into the CCSA that they get when they dial 8 in Maryland? Well, that comes from Connecticut. And instead of dialing 9140, I'm going to dial 8406. So here it is, 727-8406, and then when there's cut through, I will dial 660-2368, and then a pound sign to knock off the pulse repeater.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or ask your operator to help you. This is a recording. 203-156. We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again or ask your operator to help you. This is a recording. 203-156. We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
What you've heard is basically, that's how the network works.
True enough, but it deserves a review because everything isn't immediately obvious to everyone. The simplest route is when something rings directly out of the Atlanta switch. 743 is an example of that. And here's a trademark of the Dan Ray switches. That's right, the timing on the tones, the ring, and the reorder does tend to hiccup every now and then. Notice that this ringtone sounds dry and local, no carrier noise. More complex than this is a call to a PBX in the southern region. Here, the Atlanta switch dials or touch tones into the PBX. That makes a pause after I dial the last digit. Then, the sound of the PBX comes on with carrier noise, and in this case, ring, from the 794 PBX in Columbia, South Carolina. A Chicago area PBX will go through the Chicago Tandem. Atlanta touch tones the number to the Chicago Tandem. That causes a pause after I dial, then you hear carrier noise. Then there's another pause while the Chicago Tandem either touch tones or dial pulses to the destination PBX. In this case, a dimension PBX, 480. Since I'm calling a non-working number group, we'll get the dimension intercept tone. Tonight, Atlanta was slow to cut through the sound, so it really should have sounded more like this. Calls to the Northeast region are sent through the Connecticut Tandem, and there is CCIS between Atlanta and Connecticut. For this reason, when the call's going through Connecticut, the carrier noise comes on right away, and then there's a delay while Connecticut dials out to whatever its destination is. The 551 dimension PBX in New York is an example. After I dial the last digit, you'll hear carrier noise come on right away, and then a pause while the Connecticut Tandem is dialing into the PBX, which again will give us the intercept tone. If the call doesn't ring out of the Atlanta switch directly, or go to a distant PBX, or go to a PBX via the Chicago or the Connecticut Tandem, it can go out through the Bell System's long-distance network, probably on an outward Watts line. If you dial anything at all in the 246 in-company code, the Atlanta switch picks up a local Atlanta out-Watts line, dials some long-distance number, no matter what last 4 digits you dial, it's the same one, and then puts you on the out-Watts line. Now, after you're on the line, you then hear the Bell System's network connecting the call. The first clue that you're on an out-Watts line is this. That is the number 1 ESS connecting a line to an outgoing trunk, and it does that right after it's had a number dialed into it. And if you listen even more carefully, you'll see there's a soft tick right before that. That first soft tick is the CCSA tandem in Atlanta cutting through to the outside line. Here's 246 being dialed into the Atlanta CCSA switch and ending up going through the Bell System's out-Watts line. Now that covers the 5 ways that calls can go through when you start at the Atlanta switch. But there are some fudges that make it a little more interesting. For example, a dimension PBX, at least some of them, will allow you to come into it through the ConTelNet and access its outgoing tie lines and 9 lines. 9, of course, is the code used in North America to get an outside local line for making local calls. The 794 PBX, which turns out to be in South Carolina, is an example. By experimenting with the tape off, I discovered that only the last 3 digits of the phone number matter when you're calling 794. So the first important digit is, well, 3 digits from the end of the phone number. So into the Atlanta switch, I dialed 794 anything 9, that's for the outside line, and then just a 11. The Dimension PBXs ignore the trailing ones in that situation. I don't know why they do it, but it's a pretty consistent pattern. And it's convenient because you actually get to hear the 9 dial tone. So I'm dialing 794-1911. The 9 is the first digit that counts. The 11 gets ignored by the PBX, and then once I'm on the dial tone, I'm calling 411.
Good morning. What city?
What city have I reached?
Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay, thank you.
In these programs, when I use the term Centrex, I'm talking about when the Bell System's central office, usually number 1 ESS, sometimes number 5 crossbar, is acting like a PBX for a customer. It was also possible to fudge into outgoing lines through Centrexes, but trailing digits were not ignored. Instead, they had to be used. So, for example, there's a Centrex on 727, located somewhere in Maryland. No extensions begin with 9, because that's what they dial for outside lines. So if we dial into the Atlanta switch 727-9844, well, the 9 means outside line. The 844 is the first 3 digits of a local phone number, and once the ConTelNet has finished putting the call through, we'll be sitting on C&P of Maryland's outgoing line, with it waiting for 4 more digits. It goes through fast to the first link, the Connecticut CCSA. It's dialing 9844 into the Centrex. There. The ConTelNet has now done its job, and we're on a Maryland outgoing line with 4 more digits that need to be dialed.
At the tone, the time will be 3:30 and 20 seconds.
Fudging through the 480 dimension in the Chicago area, we were able to hear that the ConTelNet CCSA tandem for the Chicago area has the traditional MCI type dial tone, the one that started showing up in the mid-70s when MCI came on the scene. Most Dan Ray switches have this dial tone as of 1980. Here's 480-1811. Coming into the CCSA from one of the PBXs, there's no restriction on long-distance calls. So as usual, with carte blanche to call anything, I'm going to dial a long-distance call that doesn't go through on purpose. In this case, a vacant code in Montana's area code 406.
We're sorry. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. 312-18C.
The recording IDs used in the Bell system were very helpful in determining how the ConTelNet worked. In this case, we have a CCSA tandem using an outward watch line, which then uses the Chicago 312-18-4E for its outgoing calls. That places the ConTelNet switch in Chicago. Similarly, the 727 Centrex, fudging through its 9 line, we got
3012.
That's the Baltimore 4A, which places the 727 Centrex in the Baltimore long-distance sector of Maryland. And the ConTelNet switch that serves the Northeast was determined to be in Connecticut by the fact that it uses outwatts lines that go out on this tandem.
203-153.
That's the Bridgeport 4A, and actually there's a crossbar tandem in front of it, which I'll get to later. But we've already heard enough to know that the ConTelNet Northeastern switch is somewhere in Connecticut. So that's why I'm messing around with all the recording IDs. Back in 1980, when all this was done, the Bell system was very nice. They had recording IDs for all their tandems, and if you were interested in the structure of the network, it made it easy to find out what was where, at least generally speaking. Does any of this have relevance today? No, except that maybe it teaches a kind of analytical thinking. These tapes on ConTelNet were not published until 2015. Well, that's it for this segment. The next one continues this exploration, and includes a lot of really interesting and hellacious carrier noise and some line stacking.